Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our City Commission meeting, Committee of the Whole. We have a full agenda today, Commissioners. And to kick us off, we're going to talk about an important annual event. So I'm going to go up to the podium and I'll ask Lynn Heemstra to join me to read a proclamation. And then we have a couple guests who are going to say a few words. So every year we pause and we celebrate Lights On after school. So I'm going to read a proclamation and then we have a couple guests here with us today to talk about how important this is. So whereas research studies show that children who regularly attend after-school programs improve their self-confidence, school performance, and school attendance. Whereas after-school programs are a significant crime prevention strategy for youth, offering positive and engaging activities. Whereas after-school programs build strong communities by involving young people, parents, nonprofit organizations, business leaders, and adult volunteers in the lives of children. And whereas these programs require community investment from all sectors to ensure quality after-school care for children that is sustainable. And whereas the City of Grand Rapids is committed to supporting quality after-school programs that provide recreational, social, and academic opportunities for children and youth where they can learn, thrive, and be safe. Now, therefore, I, Rosalind Bliss, Mayor of the City of Grand Rapids, do hereby proclaim October 24th, 2019 as Lights On After School Day in Grand Rapids to shine a light on what after-school programs offer and urge all of our citizens to support this national day that shines a light on the importance of after-school programs. So with that, I'll turn this over to Lynn Heemstra to say a few words and introduce our guests.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Bliss, and to the City of Grand Rapids Commissioners for all your help and support. This is the 20th anniversary of Lights On After School, and the City of Grand Rapids has had an expanded learning opportunity network for nearly as long that has really brought together organizations and community partners to provide quality after-school programs for our children, and especially those most in need. Almost 21,000 children in the area. So we're excited about this day. The demand is great, and so is the need for further investment. So with us, a longstanding partner is Rosie Holmes, who is the Director of the Office of Extended Learning for the Grand Rapids Public Schools, and I'll turn it over to Rosie.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor Bliss, Board of Commissioners. Grand Rapids Public School will be participating in the annual Lights On After School celebration. We will be more than 8,000 sites who will be celebrating this event on October 24th. We're sending the message that we need to keep the lights on as well as the doors open. We have invited parents, school officials, and we're inviting you to join us in spreading the message of how important Lights On After School is. I have with me here today one of our students and a parent. We're going to be hosting our celebration at Buchanan Elementary School from 4 o'clock to 5:30 p.m. I would like to introduce to you our 5th grade student, Axel Hernandez Cortez, and his father, Santo Rivera. And I'm going to ask Mr. Rivera to come up first.
I'm not the father. I'm just one of the parents from school. Good morning. My name is Santos Rivera. I'm one of the parents from Buchanan Elementary. I support Luke very much because I have a 9-year-old son that goes to the school. He has ADHD, and this program has been helping him out a lot. It's helping him with his speech, with his attitude, with his how to present himself with people, how to speak properly, and most important, it keeps him out of the street. Okay? And I support them 100% on that. And I just hope that the panel, listens to us and, excuse me, I get a little emotional. But I hope you guys listen to our words and support this program because it is very important to the kids. These are the kids that are growing up. We can keep them out of the streets with this program, you know. I'm just speaking from my heart. I don't have nothing written, I'm just speaking from my heart, okay? And that's what I have to say, you know, keep this program going, okay? Thank you, God bless.
Thank you.
Yep, you can just read right into this microphone. And you can read this if you want right here.
Okay.
Okay?
Hi, my name is Axel, and these are my 3 words that describe loop. Fun, interesting, and helpful. Loop is fun because you could do new things every day, like Healthy You and Catch. Healthy You and Catch are vendors that come in and teach us about physical education and nutrition. Loop is interesting because everyone gives you love, and you can eat hot dinner and talk with your friends. And we get to do a lot of fun STEM activities. Loop is helpful because they help you with your homework and writing skills, because we write 5 sentences in our journal every day when we come into Loop. These are my 3 reasons why I love coming to Buchanan Elementary Loop.
All right, do you want a group picture?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should we get in here for a group picture?
Axel?
Axel, why don't you come right in? You did such a fine job.
You want to hold this up?
Yeah. There you go. Axel, future man. Here, I'll put this here. Look at Mr. Steve right here. There.
Excellent.
All
Thank
right,
you
we'll
so
give it back
much.
to you. Nice job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So next, I'm actually going to turn the microphone over to our city manager to walk us through the next 2 items and also to make an introduction.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners. Thank you for being here this morning. I want to always take an opportunity to highlight the good work of our staff, and before I do so, formally, there are a couple other items I want to share. First is a new staff member that's joining us here today, and his name is Tim Berkman. We shared his coming to Grand Rapids some time ago, and he joins us from the Macatawa Area Coordinating Council, where he was the executive director, and prior to that, he was city engineer in the city of Valparaiso, Indiana, for over 11 years. And so we're glad to have him, and prior to that, he worked in the private sector. I want to thank him for joining our team, our family, and also my appreciation to Jeff McCall, who previously served as interim engineer during the process and really helped the city be able to sustain until we were able to fill the job permanently. Also, I want to acknowledge and thank James Hurt, who is our Public Works Director, for stepping up and acting as interim managing director with the departure of Tom Almonte. And James is no stranger to our family, to City Hall, and so we really appreciate his leadership as well. Having said that, there are some other recognitions that we have on the agenda, and we have been acknowledged in very many ways for our great work for our planning department. I'm going to ask our acting director, Kristen Turkelson, to come and share our recognition with us this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity for us to recognize some really great planning work that has happened within the City of Grand Rapids over the last year or so. At the 2019 Michigan Association of Planning Conference, the city and its partners received 3 awards for the planning efforts that we have completed. First is an outstanding planning project advancing diversity and social change, and that award was granted to Viva La Avenida area-specific plan, pardon me, a little bit nervous. This was an area-specific plan that was completed for the Granville Avenue corridor, and it was an extremely intentional process that their team used that was bridging language and cultural barriers. And so I think from my perspective, it was a pleasure to work with this group, and I think it's a great plan that we then incorporated into our master plan. And I think it's great that they were able to receive the recognition that they so deserved. We would like to congratulate Aligned Planning, Roosevelt Park Neighborhood Association, Williams & Works, Naderveld, and Habitat for Humanity, Kent County. And with us today We do have Amy Brower from the Roosevelt Park Neighborhood Association, Nathan Mohammed and Malia Rakestraw from Williams & Works, and Reggie Smith, neighborhood extraordinaire and former planning commissioner, are here today. Mark Miller, also formerly with Naderveld, is here, who also worked on that project. So that's the first one that was just fabulous. The second project that received an Outstanding Planning Project Award for Urban Design is DGRI for their Street Space Guideline. And that was a guide that was geared to inform public and private investment decisions that were ultimately aimed to accelerate good urban design that was welcoming and inclusive for everybody. So we'd like to congratulate DGRI, Aligned Planning, Naderveld, and Williams & Works. And again, Mark Miller with DGRI and Tim Kelly with DGRI are here today. The third award is a leadership award for a planning advocate, and that is recognized Letitia Litscomb for her work on behalf of the planning department for the Hartside Neighborhood Quality of Life Study. And she is continuing to work with our department on the implementation of that award. And so we're extremely proud of the work that she has done on behalf of the city and on behalf of the neighborhood. So that's a summary of the awards. I know more information I was included in your packets, but I think I hope you'll stand with me and congratulate the good work that's been done.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. I'd also like to take this opportunity to recognize the great work that is going on in our water utilities, particularly in the environmental services area. And I am going to ask Chuck Schroeder to come and underscore an acknowledgement that this is not our first time as being identified as a utility of the future. I think we're becoming a pro at it. This is of the 4 years this award has been designated, I believe this is our third time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yep.
We're going to go for a trifecta eventually here in the next 2 years. So, good morning, Commissioners, Mayor. This award was presented to us in the Chicago area in September by an organization called WEF. That stands for the Water Environment Federation. It's a worldwide organization consisting of wastewater and water professionals. They meet annually. We applied for this award and received it. There are 6 major activity areas that can be achieved through this award. Those include organizational culture, beneficial biosolids, watershed stewardship, energy generation and recovery, energy efficiency. That was the award that we previously received. And this go-around is for community partnering and engagement. And the fourth one that I mentioned, energy generation and recovery, stay tuned for that because it's coming. So the concept for this award is being promoted as water systems worldwide transform their operations through innovation and technology. On your agenda sheet there, the last bullet point I want to point out, probably the most important at the bottom, working together in partnership with others in the community. I'd just like to thank Eric and Tom for their guidance and leadership on the work that we do, and the financial expertise of Jeff, Molly, Janessa, Jana, and Ruth, and the folks behind me, Brian, Kyla, and Michelle. They only represent 2% of my support staff. I wanted to bring them all here, but someone needs to keep the plant running. So I would just like to, on behalf of the City of Grand Rapids, we have this award for you. Thank you very much.
Thanks. All right. Well, on behalf of everyone up here, I just want to thank not just Chuck for all that you do and your leadership at the city, but the entire Environmental Services Department for their great work. And then congratulations again to all of our community partners and those recognized for your planning efforts. I know very often we are eager to get to action, yet we also value and know the importance of doing good planning before we move forward. And the awards highlighted today, I think, is a real testament to that. So congratulations. All right, with that, we're going to move on to our agenda, and I'm told by our city clerk that the next item can be pulled, is that right?
That's correct.
So, Commissioners, the resolution that was on our agenda for liquor, Hotel B Hotel liquor license can be pulled. My understanding is they received one from,
They went through escrow.
Escrow.
And got a broker.
okay, all right.
If we could
So I
just-
get a motion to remove that item? Can I get a motion to remove that item?
Support.
All right, all those in favor of removing? Aye. Those opposed? It carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution approving a contract in the amount of $100,000 with the Grand Rapids Area Chamber of Commerce for the Grand Rapids Retail Retention and Recruitment Initiative. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support.
All right, and Mr. Klooster will start, and then we have Dante here from the Chamber to fill us in, as well as Tim Kelly from DDA, who is also a partner in this work.
Good
Hi.
morning, Mayor and Commissioners. So you have a resolution before you approving a contract, a service agreement with the Grand Rapids Area Chamber of Commerce to act as the fiduciary and manager for the Grand Rapids Retail Retention and Recruitment Initiative in the amount of $100,000. This initiative, we're excited to launch this. It's supportive of the city's strategic plan objectives to support the creation, retention, and growth of businesses, and also to support efforts that contribute to making Grand Rapids a destination city. So we know that having a vibrant retail business environment is critical to both downtown and neighborhood business corridor strategies. And we also know that retail businesses face unique challenges in the current economic market, which is becoming continually more competitive. So this initiative has two aspects to it, the first being the commissioning of a citywide retail market study, which will inform the development of a strategy to retain and recruit retail businesses. And the second will be the establishment of a retail specialist position to be housed at the Chamber. The overall cost of the one-year pilot program is approximately $175,000 with, as I said, $100,000 coming from the city, $60,000 from the Downtown Development Authority to be considered at their next meeting, and then the Chamber providing the remainder of the support for management of the program. So we do have our partners here. I'm going to ask Dante from the Chamber to come up and talk more about the importance of this program to the Chamber's initiatives as well.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Welcome.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Dante Villarreal. I am the Vice President for Business Services and Talent Development at the Grand Rapids Chamber. My responsibilities are to work with our business community to create an environment where they're going to succeed. I work with the Talent Division, the Leadership Division, our Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Division, and I also oversee the Business Services. We see a great fit for this opportunity within our chamber because we're already out working with the business community, engaging in workshops, seminars, capacity building opportunities for our business owners. And we feel that by having this aligned with our strategy for creating and strengthening businesses, it only benefits this specific targeted area, which is first floor retail. As many of you know, retail's changing. It's the online competition is really taking everyone to task, and we feel we need to be intentional in how we position our first floor retail here in our city to be successful. A little background on myself. I have spent most of my career, 17 years working at the Small Business Development Center as a business consultant and director of the program at Grand Valley State University prior to coming to the Chamber. I'm a certified business consultant. I work with businesses day in, day out. That's my thing. I'm really independent of any sales or membership activity at the Chamber or government affairs. My work is to strengthen the business community. I'd be happy to answer any questions with the program itself.
Commissioners? Commissioner Hart?
I just had one question, and that we're going to do this study, we're going to identify all the vacancy. Will it lead to some analysis around the spaces that are difficult to keep retail space, to open it up for a conversation around some zoning shifts to allow office space or some more flexible use in those spaces? So will this study be leveraged to then say, these are areas where it's real tough to keep retail? Can we consider some different, flexibility in order to have active use in those spaces that's maybe not retail?
Yes, that is correct. The study will look at variety of different industry trends that are happening in retail as well, and prescribe where should we be focusing, what industries. It might be traditional retail as we think, but it might be some type of office space or dental office or something that they see as a must, dependent on density and so forth.
Mayor? But in
ahead,
terms of
Stephen.
our specific land use around that, that's something the staff can take in consideration as we get that study and also as we conclude the other economic analysis that we're doing about the equitable economic development, to see if there are some land use issues that are making it difficult for businesses to develop and expand.
And I'll add to that, I've read some studies that have been done in other cities, and typically they're pretty comprehensive. So in addition to identifying the vacancies and what hasn't done well in a certain area, they'll also look at gaps of what potentially would do well there. If you think of, several years ago, we looked at like Metro Edge data that said, okay, based on the density and that this neighborhood already has 3 coffee shops, probably not the best to add another coffee shop. However, they're missing a salon, or they're missing these other types of amenities. And so typically, I would assume that this
That's correct,
analysis
Mayor.
will be very similar. Talk about current state, what's doing well, look at a historical perspective, but then also project into the future. And typically compared that to other types of business districts and the types of retail that you need to really be vibrant and diverse.
So is there a particular number in terms of retail businesses that you would like to get the study to look at?
So the study's gonna give us that metric for us to look at and see where can we create impact. What's the quantity or the specific number that we want to impact.
And doing that, are you looking at those businesses to become a part of the chamber as well?
No, we're not. I do want to share that I operate 4 programs. We operate over $500,000 in grant dollars that come to the chamber for these programs that are 100% independent of membership. So I don't want you to feel that retail is going to be part of our membership. However, they do access all of the services that we do provide.
And if I could add,
Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Kelly.
we began this intentionally by outsourcing because we did not staff up to dedicate a person to business expansion and recruitment. We know we have a contract with the right place that looks at primarily large-scale industrial manufacturing companies to relocate to the region. And we talked about the need to be very deliberate about small business development, particularly at the retail level within the city. And this is a first step. Ultimately, what we want to see are some outcomes, and we've talked about that. And Dante and I have talked about what are really good outcomes in terms of a number of businesses. I'm hoping that we won't have to wait. The aggressive side of me is hoping that we don't wait until the study actually start doing some recruitment.
Correct.
And we might even get some businesses to actually begin to look at expanding or relocating even prior to the completion of the study.
That is correct.
Yeah.
We are eager to begin.
I'll go Commissioner Kelly, then I'll counter. Commissioner Kelly?
Yeah, I know this is a big task ahead, but we've had some conversations around our corridor improvement district tables about this upcoming opportunity for them. So certainly the leakage, as the mayor mentioned, is important so that those groups can actually do some marketing on their own. They're hoping to have some opportunity for input as this gets started so that they can talk about their needs. SEPTED is a wonderful addition to this as well so that they can provide some safety around their retail establishments. But given the concern about the competition with online retail, I know that at an MML conference a few years ago, we all got a book by Bo Burlington about doing some above and beyond kind of work, which again is probably early to talk about, but around co-purchasing, for example, so that there are some efficiencies that can lower the bottom line costs. So I hope that that is something that we consider whether we work through the SIDS or the business associations, or we form something through the chamber. But that's another way to reduce some of their costs and level the playing field at least a little bit.
Absolutely, and co-purchasing, for example, can be for goods, but it could also be for services, professional
Right.
services, and so forth. One of the things I love about this initiative is it's strongly based on the retention aspect as well. So how do we strengthen what's there already? That is low-hanging fruit. That we can begin day one in providing support. First of all, understanding what the needs are and understanding what the collective need maybe of a SID is to bring in a certain professional service that can be spread out through, a marketing consultant, right? Or
Exactly.
something like that, of that nature. In my career, I've spent many years working with the neighborhood business associations and understanding how collectively businesses thrive versus being in little silos. So from day one, the retention piece starts to happen right away. I'm very familiar with the entrepreneur ecosystem here in town as well, and plugging people in and so forth. So we really are eager to begin.
Wonderful. Well, you've had a long history of working first
Thank
in
you.
Grand Valley in this whole field, so
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go over here to Commissioner O'Connor.
No, I just want to say thank you. I'm really excited about this initiative and opportunity for Grand Rapids. I see it started, I think, as a conversation between the city manager and myself around some neighboring municipalities who've been very intentional in their efforts to attract and retain businesses in their community, and have identified locations where opportunities exist. And as we go through, we just talked about the Granville Avenue Corridor Improvement Plan. We have all these wonderful plans in place, but it's important that we respect the businesses and the longstanding investments that have been made in our community, but looking to augment them and support them with new business opportunities to help them grow and be successful in the future. So I think this is a wonderful partnership, and I look forward to seeing the fruits of this pay off in the
Commissioner.
years to come.
Great. Well, I'll go to
I'm sorry,
Commissioner Lanier.
Commissioner
Moody?
O'Connor, I'm sorry, I didn't hear a word you said. Would you repeat that, please?
I just wanted to say how excited I was about this opportunity, and I think it's going to be important, that we have this, and we celebrate the businesses that have been in our community for a long time, longstanding neighborhood and community businesses, but at the same time, we look to augment and support them with, an infusion of new talent, of new businesses that help make our corridors more vibrant, our business districts more diverse, and we have opportunities for local people to invest, as well as support them and supplant them by people who are looking to grow and expand their business from outside the region, who might be wanting to make a new investment or grow their small business, and find ways to put them in Grand Rapids, and make sure that they don't go someplace else, where this should be the place that they want to make that investment.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate you saying that. I just want to make sure that I got some clarity. This study, is it for the downtown region only?
No.
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 I want to make that, okay, thank you.
Commissioner Lanier?
Thank you all for the presentation. I just have a quick question. I know that the Southtown Corridor Improvement District recently, through their BASP, had a very similar study done by the consulting firm Street Sense. It was a part of their BASP process. So I'm wondering if you're aware of that, and I'm not sure what other CIS who may have gone through something similar, but it may shrink your workload a little bit if you have those reports from some of the studies that have
Absolutely.
already taken place. So just wanted you to be aware of that.
That's a very good question, Commissioner, and good point. And that, we have had that discussion already, that not just Southtown, but there are other areas of the community that have had plans done over varying periods of time and at varying levels of detail. And so all of that will be, provided and considered before we develop the scope for the study.
Sounds good, thank you.
And John, I know some of them were done several years ago. Will that data be updated?
Yeah,
Okay.
the report will be consistent across the whole city.
Okay, that's helpful. All right, any final thoughts or questions? Okay, with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. Thank you all, thanks for your partnership. Okay, so next we'll turn to our strategic plan progress report and updates. So I'll turn over to our city manager to tee this up.
Thank you. Thank you again, Mayor. We wanted to give an update on where we are on accomplishing some of the elements of our strategic plan you just voted on one of the items that was in the plan, but we want to give an overall progress report. And Allison, are you driving the slides? Okay, if we can go to the next one. And so, as you recall, with your guidance, your leadership, we were very deliberate about discussing the future of our city, our community, and being very mission, values, and vision-centric to make sure that everything that we do around all of our priorities, our 6 strategic priorities, reflected our core values and advanced the mission of the city for us to be this robust, welcoming, equitable, collaborative type of community. And to that end, we have done a lot of good work in not only adopting the strategic plan, our strategy, but also using that strategy to develop our fiscal roadmap that allows us to be very intentional about implementation. And so in concert with our values around accountability, we want to continue to give progress on where we are, both from a fiscal perspective as well as operational perspective of implementing strategy. So I wanted to share with you, this will be first of a series of discussions that will almost lead into our next conversation about the iteration of our strategic plan, because what we adopted was a plan that would be accomplished over a series of years, 4 years. We can't accomplish it all at once. I wish we could. We don't have the funding and resources to do that. So today we'll give an update on where we are. We'll also have another workshop on the 18th. And on the 18th, we will talk about our priorities for fiscal year 2021. What items do we want to continue to focus on that we've started for FY20? What items do we need to add? And what things perhaps do we need to refocus, repivot, or discontinue our focus on? Hopefully, around February or March, we'll have more of a formal mid-year progress report on performance. But prior to that, I hope to also be informed with some updates from our housing assessment study, as well as we should have good data on the equitable economic development and mobility study that's going on now. And that will be able to inform us about our mid-year performance update. There may also be some things that come out of the retreat in November that would cause us to think about whether or not we want to do some pivoting mid-year and not wait till a new fiscal year to amend the budget. We've had discussions around items to improve public safety. I've been talking to the police chief about strategies, and hopefully we're looking forward to discussing some of those things, particularly things around technology that I think that will help us improve public safety, but also some other emerging conversations around lead as well as homelessness. And so those are things that we perhaps didn't get quite the opportunity to go as deep as we wanted to when we were discussing the budget last year, and we can talk about whether or not that's an item for future budget deliberations or something we want to be more flexible and make decisions on prior to the next round of budget discussions. There were also some other items that we withdrew from the budget considerations last time in order to make sure that we were adopting a sustainable budget. We'll have a re-estimation of our fiscal forecast, and I'm pleased, don't want to get too far ahead of the numbers, but everything that I've seen so far has shown me that we were very conservative in our projections, and we are poised to outperform both our revenue projections and expenditure projections that we thought we were going to have at this point. But it's still preliminary, so we'll hear more of that in November. And then on April the 28th is when we're targeting our proposal of the FY21 budget, the manager's proposed budget. And that will be the kickoff on the 28th. That will begin with a series of workshops that day included, as well as the following weeks of the 5th, the 12th, the 19th, and we'll have 2 meetings on the week of the 19th. Most of the meetings, I'll just point out, the meetings on the 28th, the 12th, and the 19th are already scheduled. Commission meetings, the meeting on May the 5th and the 21st are special meetings that will have to be called. Next slide.
Okay, well, thank you, City Manager. I'm just going to provide a little bit of an overview of some of the process improvements that we have been working on to implement the strategic plan and to build a framework for performance management. And just a reminder that it does take some time to put a new infrastructure in place, and this is something that staff and departments have been working at really hard. I appreciate a lot of the partnerships, particularly with the budget office and the work that we're doing to try to make some alignment between the budget and the strategic plan, as well as many of our other departments. And so just a few highlights around some of the work that we've been doing to integrate the strategic plan into our operations, working with departments and having department plans and showing alignment between department work and the strategic plan, and that's in process and something that we'll continue to improve so that we can monitor performance based on strategies and objectives in the strategic plan. We've been working very hard on integrating data sources for performance metrics, and so I really want to appreciate Ms. Becky Jo Glover and her team for their partnership in this area, and we're going to highlight a little bit of that in a moment. Around collecting some additional base metrics, which will include the community survey that our Assistant City Manager Matthews has been heading up, and results that will be incorporated at a future date when those results are available. As City Manager has already mentioned, just highlighting how we're working to make some updates to our PB system for departments going in and making requests for budget items, and how departments will be asked to identify which strategies and objectives the requests aligns to and supports. We'll also be asking to provide address-specific information for capital requests so that we can continue to analyze those requests based on geography and location within the city, and then also continuing to grow the amount of data that we are requesting from departments around asking if budget requests support projects that will advance equity, so that we can start to have some more data. And of course, Ms. Stacy Stout will be leading the efforts in that area. And then lastly, just continue to build out a reporting framework. The goal moving forward being to aim for having biannual progress reports, one mid-year as well as one end-of-year report that will align with when there will be some budget discussions, so that you can continue to see how are we performing as we move into conversations about thinking about the next year or planning for the budget. And then working on wanting to develop an online reporting dashboard. There's an immense amount of information and fantastic information that's happening, and how do we consolidate that and pare that down really to highlight what you determine are the priorities moving forward. And so I'm going to turn it back to the City Manager while I pass out a sample of a progress report that we have.
Thank you. Again, I want to thank Ms. Sutter for her leadership in being our Chief Sustainability and Performance Management Officer. We certainly could not do what we've done without her leadership and her focus, and along with many others. And so I appreciate her support. What she has just passed out is a progress update. It's like a midterm report card, if you will. And there are still other information that we are going to share, both quantitatively on the metrics. As you said, we're building the system as we speak to make sure that we're able by mid-year to be very deliberate about the metrics. But what you have are highlights, and this is just the first quarter of this year. This is since the budget has been adopted. And if we looked at all the accomplishments relative to the strategic plan, I have a document that's almost 20 pages. But this is just the first quarter. So this is reflective of the very deliberate and intentional work that the staff is doing. And you can see, and I won't have time, obviously, to spend on all of these, but you can see, based on strategic priorities, how we've been deliberate about equity and accomplishments that this commission has helped just in this quarter to include the Human Rights Ordinance, or the continuation of implementation of the Third Ward Equity Fund, or the new grant that we've gotten for being deliberate about inclusive of equity around river restoration, $300,000. Fiscal sustainability, very pleased with the amount of stewardship that we've had with city resources to include stabilizing or continue stabilizing our pension fund, as well as the fiscal benefit that we've gotten in renegotiating our healthcare contract, $13 million savings over the next 3 years, and all of the things that we have done for our workforce, our employees, to include the successful negotiations that we have at the table with labor contracts, as well as additional benefits that we've had for employee quality of life, to include some of the family-friendly benefits that were approved in the contract. To supporting our facilities, the ongoing work that's here, some of our other city assets building, the Decibel that's on the plaza, to being very deliberate about being inclusive with technology. And then you'll see the next section on economic prosperity and affordability, the various initiatives that we have done to promote business expansion and recruitment, and we want to continue that. I'm looking forward to the conversation about making sure that we have a full-service economic development strategy within the city that allows us to be very deliberate about small business development, business recruitment and expansion, utilization of business development through tourism, and not just getting Experience Grand Rapids just to attract meetings, but also getting businesses to develop around tourism, and that's in concert with the river restoration and other things. As well as our conversations around housing, and you'll see some of the initiatives that align with the plan to continue our efforts in making sure that we have a very deliberate housing strategy. And again, I could go on, but I am very proud of the staff and the work that's been done to continue the efforts in expanding our strategic plan within our health and environment. You'll approve some actions today related to mobility and parking expansion, as well as there was another item on the agenda that relates to public safety around victim services and the good work that the police department has had in obtaining additional resources. So this is a narrative update of the work that we've done. What we're working on is a statistical, quantitative, measurable update, and both doing it, there's a lot of data collection that has occurred. What I'd like the staff to do now is to come and demonstrate how we're trying to be smart and open about our data collection and reporting.
Thank you, City Manager. And just a note on this more qualitative report, in partnership with the Assistant City Manager, we are exploring some tools where we can better streamline even the progress report on some of this qualitative information as well, knowing that we have a lot of great successes to share with you and wanting to make that in a manner that's more kind of easily digestible. So we're going to continue to explore some opportunities for improvement around this area as well. So with this, now, as City Manager said, wanted to take a minute to demonstrate to you some of the work that we're doing around. There are 140 metrics included in the strategic plan. And so, again, really want to acknowledge Ms. Becky Jo Glover, as well as Mr. Zach Teal and Mr. John Overman, who have really been the force behind the work that I have the opportunity to demonstrate for you today with respect to this open performance module. It is a work in progress, so this is something that we just intend to show you today where we are from a progress perspective. We're going to continue to refine and add metrics before this will be ready for publication and availability for the public. But I'm going to go ahead and switch now to our website, which is our open performance website. And if you could follow along with me on your screen, just want to show we do have a tab for citywide metrics, but we have one tab for each of the strategic priorities. And for purposes of time today, I'm just going to show two examples. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the governmental excellence strategic priority. And here you can see all of the objectives are being highlighted on this particular page. And I'm going to show an example under the attract, hire, train, and retain high-performing employees. And do want to, as this is getting loaded, take a moment to thank Ms. Patty Cottle. I know that she worked very hard on getting a lot of the data prepared in partnership with our innovation team to get this ready. So here you'll see in the box kind of high-level report out of where we are quantitatively. So the particular measure is the employee turnover rate. We are currently at 7.39% if you are reviewing fiscal year 19, what it is showing the date here. This one is identified in the color blue because this is currently in the process of being measured. There are other metrics that will show green as having achieved the goal or will show red as falling short of achieving the goal so that there's a visual signal as to how we were performing on each of the metrics. And down here also there are the strategies that are associated with this metric as well. But here now you can actually go ahead and click to move into more additional data with respect to this particular metric. And so again, the same box, you can start to see over time, staff has done a fantastic job of tracking employee turnover going all the way back to 2014. So you can hover and start to see trends and get the specific numbers for each date. And then some fantastic graphs and charts that have been developed to tell the story about what's been happening with this particular metric. So here, trying to and working on building out around our commitment to disaggregate data based on race, ethnicity, gender identity, or geography. So here, this one focusing on gender, but I want to scroll down. There's a little part where we talk about why this metric matters, but you can get into some additional details around this. And so I want to go ahead and click in on looking at new hires by turnover versus new hires by race. And so if I click into one of these areas, oops, excuse me, I got to go back up here. And this will actually show you, and it was a little difficult if you weren't quite looking. When you click on it, it provides you additional details. So now it's breaking down turnover by retirement, resignation, layoff, and discharge so that we have some additional details there. And then as I was showing down here, you can start to look at the first bar here, which is the darker teal cover, is showing turnover for African Americans, and then the lighter colored teal is showing new hires for African Americans over time. And so again, just highlighting a few to show you what we are looking at building out. It's a process in place right now where we're going to continue to vet this, and I think I just want to show you for a moment one other option in an area where we're working to show maps. So under our economic prosperity strategic priority, I know that our economic development team really worked on this one as well. So again, you can see all of the different objectives. Oops, excuse me, I think I got to go back one.
Coming soon.
Yep. Clicked on the wrong one. Under supporting a resilient business environment. We have the metric here where you can see this is showing in green that the goal has been met for the percent of new buildings and commercial renovations that have been approved administratively. And here, just as an example, you can see we even have a yellow that's showing things are near target, but I wanted to show the map. So drilling into a little more detail specifically around the approvals, administrative approvals, again, over time. But here's really the map and working on building this out for different metrics where you can see additional detail by different areas. And so we do have the opportunity to show these by wards. We can drill into neighborhoods of focus. This particular map has been built to show the number of administrative approvals by neighborhood with some additional visuals below. And so kind of moving into one of the other areas, just wanted to note, City Manager mentioned continuing to have conversations with you around identifying some key metrics that we'll want to be highlighting. And so we'll be building a dashboard that will be available to maybe elevate a smaller number of metrics to continually have at the forefront. And so that's something that we would be developing here that would be available on the home page. So with that, I think I am now going to just...
Allison, can I just ask a couple of questions? Since you're on this and others may have questions too. Under citywide metrics, does it also break down data by neighborhood?
So right now, the citywide metrics is an area that captures all of the metrics across the strategic plan, so all 140. Yeah. I think, and in as many of these as possible, we will be breaking down the data in that more granular level.
Okay. I'm pretty familiar with Socrata and the capabilities of that software. And I know other cities that have utilized it have very well built out systems that can take a deep dive and get to that granular data, which I think is very helpful. not just for this entire body, but even for commissioners who represent their wards, to be able to have access to that information, I think is important. And then the other question I have is around crime stats. You know, this I think is the area where we often get asked questions. And so I'm curious the scope of the crime stats that will be made available. I know we talked about this when we passed our open data policy. We've talked about this many a times as we talk about wanting to be transparent. So is that built out yet? Can we see a couple examples under the safety, public safety?
So right now, I can
It's still in
can speak to
progress.
this. That one is something that is still in progress.
Can you speak a little bit then about the scope of what will be under that section for public safety and crime stats?
So right now, what I can speak to, and I'm glad Ms. Glover is coming up here as well. For purposes right now in this initial approach, we're focusing on the 140 metrics that are included in the strategic plan, which does include some of those crime statistics or safe community statistics as well. I think that we'll have to continue working on thinking about other metrics that might not currently be in the strategic plan and how that might be covered. But
And if I could just add, as Ms. Glover comes, those Part 1 crime data, those are metrics, and we've talked about disaggregating that by geography as well as other measurables that we're able to track, getting more real-time data from the police department. So that absolutely is the expectation. And before we talk about more metrics, and we're going to have a conversation about actual refining the ones that we have now. That will be the conversation for the retreat.
Okay.
What are the key metrics we want to focus on as a city? We can't, 140 is a lot. We really should be, if we wanted a report card that the public can see, the departments can see, the commission can see real easily, we should have somewhere between 20 and 40 that are real easily identifiable for each area. What are the top 5 to 6 public safety metrics that we should be focusing on as a city? Then we're able to delve in a little bit more and disaggregate it by geography, race, et cetera.
So maybe I'm, so this is wonderful data to show where we are with our strategic priorities, but then there's a lot of data that we collect in the city that should just be made available to the community if they're interested in it, that's not necessarily related to this. And I know this software program has the availability to do that. So is there gonna be, we'll have information available for open data, but then we'll have the data collected specifically for strategic plan. Am I right? Is that what we're building out?
So this application solution does allow us to have the open data, and part of this whole process is having those discussions with those different departments and partners. And one of them, of course, is happening right now with Chief Payne, Chief Lehman as well, because you want to be able to have all that data available that anyone can look at and visualizations. So we're starting that process now, but you'll be meeting on I believe it's the 18th, to talk about the strategic priorities, to highlight which ones we should build out. We've built some out already. But as you're doing that, departments also have other data that we're going to be working with them on to have internal sites, but eventually to be public, using user testing and some other things with our community, with you, to go through and make sure that we've got and we're getting the right feel. So yes, we do own that part of the solution, and yes, it will be part of the governance and plan going forward.
Good. I mean, this is wonderful for us, especially as we chart our strategic plan. But we all know that people in the community are interested in other data that probably won't be in this.
We want to be open by default. So ideally, we want to have everything out to the public. It's good for business development, for startups, for people to develop solutions to specific problems that we have now. But today, we're focusing on our ability to have a report card on our commitment to the public on the things that we said we would do around our plan and in the budget. But absolutely, as part of our governmental excellence, we have a commitment to be as open as we can. And I think that's going to take a little bit more time to identify all the data sets. But I think in the past year, we've made progress on the number of data sets that we have open now versus a year ago. And I can't remember the number, but I know it's increased quite a
Last year
bit.
was 64, and we're over 107, 137 now. And that's because we're working with our departments and identifying those sets. So again, as the city manager said, this is a work in progress, and so we are open by default. So those will all be out there. Anything that's associated with these metrics can be downloaded and is available on the open data site. The ones that have been developed already have already been added as well.
Perfect. That answers my questions. This is great. Commissioner Lanier?
Thanks, Allison, for presenting this. I'm curious to know, I know when we were going through the website upgrade, we had beta testers that were internal team members within the city as well as community members. And I think the outcome of that was we were able to work out a lot of kinks. So I'm just curious to know if we're using the same methodology this time with this process.
The exact same methodology will be used. We found success through that. And so when you're working with your departmental partners, as well as the commission, and then as well with our users out in the community, that's why you find success. And then you start also having a dialogue about what's important on top of the strategic priorities and the data that we'll be showing.
Okay.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
All right.
So with this as well, just continuing to iterate and add, it's very exciting. It did take, and I just want to acknowledge Ms. Glover and her team again, and a pretty extraordinary amount of work to get. We have 19 metrics that we are working through in the system right now. And the goal here is really to automate as much as possible. So there are a lot of data sources that are in existence out there, whether we're pulling them from our own systems or taking the American Census data. And so her team's been able to do that, automate as much data collection as we can, layer the census data so that we can start to get that more granular level of information and disaggregating performance based on not only geography, but looking at race and ethnicity and gender as well. So that's something that we're continuing to work on. Some data is more easily available and is automated at this time, whereas other data is not, and wanting to continue to uphold the data governance standards that have been developed so that we know that the data that we are presenting to the community has been quality checked and has gone through those processes as well. So that's just kind of a work in progress, and we'll continue to add some, and we'll look forward to your conversation on the 18th so that we have some more direction about the metrics of most interest so that we can continue building those from here. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to the city manager.
Thank you. And as I said earlier, so we're looking forward to the conversation on the 18th. We'll have the preliminary budget forecast as well as our discussions around priorities for the next year. And that very deliberate data conversation about what are the top metrics that we should be focusing on so we don't have the entire organization going around combining a bunch of data that really it's good, but it's not the key performance metrics. So that is going to be a very helpful discussion for us. We're going to try to propose some. So you're not starting from a blank sheet, but we're certainly looking for feedback and that continued iteration and testing to make sure we get the right metrics. And then, as I said earlier, we'll have those conversations around mid-year adjustments. So I think Mr. Matthews is going to wrap us up.
Bat and cleanup today. So one of the things that you've heard quite a few times in the presentation today is that it's an iterative process that we're building and that we're learning. And we've been very transparent about that from the beginning because we started with a plan that was words on a sheet of paper. And what we've been doing over the last 6 months is really taking that and operationalizing that in a way that's going to be sustainable for the organization and is going to be transparent for the public. So what you see here is kind of a visualization of the way that we're trying to iterate on the process itself. You see in that first iteration, that was the work that you all did leading up to the adoption of the budget in July. We're now in that second iteration where we've aligned the department business plans with the strategic plans. So the strategic plan gets down to that activity level, but then we've got to link that to the work that the departments are doing every day. Ultimately, the goal is that that then gets linked all the way down into the performance evaluations for employees, but that's down the road. We've also gone about identifying those initial data sources for the metrics. That in itself is a learning process. Data is messy. We have a lot of systems that all process it a different way, so I will also give credit to everybody that's been doing that work because you have to have discipline around that process, and we learn a lot just looking at it and figuring out what we can and can't get out of our system. So one of the conversations we'll be having over this next iteration is which metrics can we actually effectively measure? Which metrics are actually pointing towards the outcome that we wanted? And where might we need to make adjustments? The next steps, and some of the stuff that you saw today, establishing that key performance indicator metrics and dashboard, continuing to work on that reporting framework, both for you and for the public, and then really working, and Allison talked about this a little bit, refining the budget alignment process. So we're moving from what was a very hands-on manual process, a lot of folks pulling information from a lot of places and creating a lot of separate spreadsheets to get us through the budget process last year to demonstrate alignment. We're starting the conversation now on how can we use the systems that exist to streamline that process so more information is actually in the process from the beginning and we're not having to do a lot of rework on the back end. So that's really what we focused on with the second iteration. The third, which will start in the third quarter, we're going to work on refining that business plan alignment leading into the next budget year. This year, it was, like the other, it was a very manual process, and we want to start making those more lightweight for the departments so that they can focus more on the work and less on the reporting and the tracking of the work. Adjusting and modifying the metrics, which I mentioned. Refining the report, continuing to refine the reporting and the framework and the process that we do that by. The city manager talked about establishing our 21 priorities and then adopting a budget that's aligned to the plan. As we move forward from there, we'll continue that process of refining and iterating over time so that it's a seamless process that just becomes a natural part of business and it becomes a lighter and lighter lift for everybody that's involved. So that it really does achieve the goal, which is the strategic plan is, yes, it's the work that we're doing, but it's also defining the culture by which we do the work. And that's ultimately where we want to be, and that's the longer-term goal as we continue to work on this.
Thank you, Mayor. That concludes our briefing.
All right. Commissioners, any questions? Commissioner Kelly?
Well, I just want to thank you for this work. Certainly, I think that there's a certain amount of courage around being this transparent, and this is what our constituents have been asking for years. So to your team and Becky Jo and John Overman, thank you so much for this work. As I just this cursory look at it, it looks like it's going to be much easier to use, user-friendly, so I appreciate all the testing that you always do with those of us who are going to be using it. I'm looking forward to really honing in on some of those key metrics that you talked about, and it does make sense that, you know, we can't go out and just gather all this data, then what do you do with it? That we're really trying to hone in on how does it refer back to our vision and then change the culture in this organization. So thank you for that. I know that we've been hearing for so long that from our consumers that they want more ease of use of data, and they want to use it not only for just monitoring us and what we do, but also for their business enterprises, their neighborhood work, and so on. So really appreciate this. Thank you. It's exciting.
Commissioners, any other comments or questions? All right, thank you. We'll go to our next item before us, and that is a resolution considering zoning ordinance text amendments for rooftop solar collection systems.
So moved.
All right, and Allison, you can stay up here for that. Right? No? I'm sorry. Kristen, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm here in support.
I'd like to know why the zoning text amendments always seem to follow these fabulous initiatives. Anyways, so before you is an update to the zoning text amendment that is specific to modifying or suggesting a modification to our solar panel requirements that are located in Article 11. Over the past several months, we have been working with Allison's team on the Soul Smart designation program that I think you are familiar with. And it was noted that the zoning restriction that we have on rooftop solar panels is an impediment to a higher designation. The current ordinance does allow for rooftop solar panels. However, there is a restriction that they cannot be on a street-facing elevation. We do have an administrative departure to allow for that. What's that?
No,
I'm sorry. So we do have an administrative departure that can allow for that, where it's demonstrated that performance would be compromised if it could not be placed on the street-facing elevation. However, as you probably know, that is a bit of a process that's viewed as kind of burdensome and does carry a cost with it. It is also somewhat subjective, as a planner has to review it, and the criteria is not objective. And so, however, planning staff has indicated that we do often, when we do receive requests for administrative departures, that they are granted. So we're really viewing this as an alignment between the practice that we've had and the policy itself, or the code requirements itself. So therefore, we're proposing a modification that the Planning Commission has considered, where we would allow for rooftop solar panels to be placed on any non-street facing elevation, as we do currently, and allow it to be placed on a street-facing elevation where the roof has southern exposure. We did receive some public hearing, input at the hearing that would suggest that they would like to see us be a little bit more progressive or more liberal in our lessen the restrictions. However, we have expressed concern about whether or not the street-facing panels could possibly be affecting neighborhood character and the form standards that were established through the Neighborhood Pattern Workbook. So both the Planning Commission and staff have expressed a willingness to continue to evaluate this specific subject. And however, we think that it would be more appropriate to do that through a deliberate engagement process like the master plan, where I think climate resiliency and such will be a significant topic for consideration. So we think that this advances the Soul Smart designation and trying to align our objectives and with the allowance or the consideration that we'll continue to do so in the future. Any questions for me?
All right, Commissioner?
Yeah, it was helpful. One of my questions was going to be timeline, but you did mention the master plan. But do you think between now and that we will have enough data? I mean, I'm eager to see us move forward if we can, because of the concerns that the community have, the Climate Action Group, to allow this. But I also understand that we have to be cautious. We get concerns from people about how things look if it's street facing. So I don't know if you have any sense, because of past practice and how many people come to us asking for solar panels, but do you have a sense of how long this might take? Because perhaps we can come back sooner.
I think that would be a conversation with the manager's office for me to see what kind of, I mean, right now we'd be challenged with capacity to do a separate and intentional engagement effort with the neighborhoods.
I'm thinking more of requests that come through to get a sense. Maybe if you've got a number of them that come to us and you look at them and they're fine, then you can start to go to administrative approval with some guidelines.
Administrative, I'm not.
Sooner than later, that you approve these things administratively.
Sure, I think we can continue to monitor that and track it. I think right now it was a little difficult because it is so restrictive, and people that wanted solar panels did not even apply for the administrative departure. So I think our data is a little lacking right now, but certainly we can continue to do that, and maybe in the next 6 months to a year, we could bring that forward for further consideration. I think it is such a small subset of the community that is looking to install solar panels, and so whether changes would be widely accepted or appreciated, that's just an unknown to us.
Okay. Well, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner.
Yeah, I'm thankful for these adjustments. I look forward to the conversation about being more progressive with it as well. And I do want to just give a shout out to my constituent, David Hast, who met with me a few months ago, and for the Grand Rapids Climate Action Group that really was advocating for this, among many other things. They've recently put forth a letter to us with some recommendations that I think are important for us to consider. But I'm looking forward to this, looking forward to taking it a notch further in the master plan. But I think that this is a good start.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. I'll add, because I've had multiple discussions about this, I definitely think it's a step in the right direction, but I too am hopeful that we are a bit more forward-thinking. I know we just saw an affordable housing development in Austin, and they had solar panels on every single building, including facing the street, and those families are paying zero in energy. It's out, they're completely net zero, so they're generating the energy that they're using, and they have zero utility bill, which will help them maintain affordability. And it was on a community land trust, but there's a lot of innovative things happening out there, and as energy prices go up and people continue to struggle to pay their bills, it potentially is a really great option for folks.
which we have a local example, the Genesis Housing Project at St. James has solar on the roof.
Yeah.
All utilities are included in their rents, and their rents are as low as $300 and some a month, and the maximum on it is 800 something. And so, what a gift! In addition to being able to subsidize those rents, to be able to mitigate living in Michigan in the winter.
Yeah, that's another great local example. Yeah. All right, any other, Commissioner Moody?
Yeah, we've not had any opposition against solar panels, have we? So it is a good thing to do within our community then.
Yeah. All right, anything else? All right, with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next, Ms. Dirkelston can stay right up there, is a resolution setting the dates for a public hearing and consideration of an objection to a waiver of the required separation distance from Lexington Park and Westtown Commons Park for a proposed medical marijuana facility at 3 and 9 Lexington Avenue Northwest.
So thank you.
All right, want to tell us about this? This is to set the public hearing for November, let's see, what's the date for the public hearing? November 12th.
November 12th,
Correct?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so if it's okay, I'd like to hand this over to Landon Bartley, who's been doing the work on this specific item.
Our in-house marijuana expert coming up.
They call me Weed Man.
Do we need to give you a new title?
I've already changed business cards, hope you don't mind. We have 2 park waiver requests coming before you, and we're looking for you to set public hearing dates to establish November 12th as the date for the public hearing, and then November 19th for a decision. We have 2 requests. The first is at 3 and 9 Lexington Northwest, and that's located within 1,000 feet of 2 parks. As you know, the Planning Commission can waive, can waive the park setback, which is 1,000 feet required, and then it's up to the City Commission to determine whether or not, as the owner of that park, to object to the Planning Commission granting a waiver. So within 1,000 feet of 3 and 9 Lexington, which is at the northwest corner of Fulton and Lexington on the west side, you have 2 parks. Lexington Park just to the north, directly about 310 feet by the network, by the sidewalk or the road, closer to 550. And then to the southwest, you have Westtown Commons, which is, as the crow flies, about 980 feet, but by the network, by walking or driving, closer to 1,500. So I'd like to answer any questions about this, or I can talk to the other waiver request, which is on South Division.
Hearing. This will allow neighbors an opportunity to be, if they're not informed about this request, they'll be informed about it, and they'll have an opportunity to come and speak to this body.
Correct.
Okay. So any questions or comments about the public hearing? Setting the date for November 12th? All right, I'll call that question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next it'll take us to the resolution setting the date for a public hearing and consideration of an objection to a waiver for the required separation distance for Burton Woods for a proposed medical marijuana facility at 2249 South Division Avenue.
Support.
All right. So I'll
Thank
turn
you.
it back.
So it's a very similar request. You have a proposed marijuana provisioning center at 2249 South Division, which is just south of Burton Street. Within 1,000 feet to the east, you have the Burton Woods Park, also known as the Garfield Park Natural Area. The direct distance is just under 1,000 feet, about 910 feet. Network distance, I made an error. My understanding was that the only entrance to that park was on Jefferson. There are actually other entrances near Francis and Melville, so just to the west of the park, sort of toward the north end, and then also off of Everest at the south end. I talked to park staff late last week, and they informed me of that. So even so, the closest entrance close to Francis and Melville is about 1,100 feet if you're taking the sidewalk or the public road network. So we will have the same question about bringing this to a public hearing on November 12th for decision on the 19th.
Great, thanks. Commissioners, any questions about that? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Hopefully at the next one, when I actually call the question, it'll make sense. So we'll see if I've learned from our last experience. All right, next that will take us to a resolution approving a Michigan Natural Resource Trust Fund Development Project Agreement with the MDNR in the amount of $300,000 for improvements to Roberto Clemente Park. Can I get a motion?
Motion. Support.
All right, our Parks Director is here to tell us about this. We always appreciate our partnership with the Trust Fund.
That we do. Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, City Manager. This is essentially an amended agreement with the Michigan Department of Natural Resources for the grant that the Mayor just mentioned. The budget has been adjusted slightly to accommodate for a little bit more reduced stormwater retention at the park space based on soil conditions and soil testing. But essentially, the park components of the project remain the same. We are still doing green infrastructure. We're still doing all of the natural play components. And to match this $300,000 MDNR grant, we are putting in about $650,000 of parks millage funding from the dedicated 2013 millage. So with that, we would be receiving these funds by December of this year, with construction slated for May and June of next summer.
That's great. All right, questions, Commissioner?
I'm glad that this is finally here. I think it was over a year ago that I wrote my letter of support for this grant. So glad that we're at the point where we can get some shovels in the ground and make that park awesome again, because it's a beautiful space.
Indeed. Thank you for your support.
Yeah, and all the neighbors, I'm sure, are eager to see their planning, their plans through the planning process come to fruition. So, any other comments? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next that will take us to a resolution authorizing the release of a request for proposal for the development of a portion of a city-owned property located at 22 Ottawa Avenue Northwest. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support.
All right, Mr. Klooster, you want to tell us about this?
Good morning. Again, this is the resolution that authorizes the release of a request for a proposal seeking development partners for a mixed-use project on the property we affectionately call the Wedge, on the corner of Fulton and Ottawa. The RFP is coming to you after review of the property for sale according to the City Commission policy. That's 900-41. You may recall that this property was previously listed for sale, and we had an option for several years, and but no project has transpired. That property was the previous approach was listing the property for sale on the MLS. We are now being more intentional and have done sort of pre-work in developing an initial plan for the property. So you may recall that back in September of 2018, we brought to you the initial designs that Mobile GR had put together using its contract with WGI and Fishbeck, Thompson, Carr, and Huber. At this point, what we're looking to do is to partner with a developer that would, for a project that would include an expansion of the existing Ottawa and Fulton parking ramp. So that would be the city's, potentially the city's portion of the project, and result in adding up to 200 parking spaces to that facility. We are very open to any options that might be interesting to a potential development partner as far as construction and ownership or leasing of that facility. And then we really want to maximize the development opportunities that would exist on top of the parking ramp addition. We have several goals related to this, obviously, providing additional monthly and visitor parking to the downtown core, activating previously underutilized space by creating ground floor commercial on that important corner, providing an opportunity to continue the residential and or commercial development downtown above the parking ramp. And then we also, if you've had an opportunity to review the RFP that's contained in your agenda packet, we're taking this opportunity to pilot a program that would be a partnership with the city and the proposed developer to further the city's objective to increase the dollars spent with micro-local, minority, and women-owned businesses in connection with this project. So we've had some learnings through our engagement related to the Equitable Economic Development and Mobility Strategic Plan, and we're taking this opportunity to test out some things that can inform future work in that area as well. So if approved by the City Commission, we would move forward with issuing this RFP with responses due the end of November to be reviewed by a committee and then bring a recommendation back to you.
Great, thanks. I have a couple questions, and I'll turn to my colleagues. So John, in reading the RFP, I had a couple thoughts. My hope is that we would leave it a little bit more open-ended for potential creative proposals. So I know it says office like on the lines, but I'm wondering if we want to put office / and/or residential. It's in the narrative, but not necessarily in the images that I saw, which I
Sure.
thought was a little inconsistent. And then secondly, I know it had 7 stories, but I would love to see a taller building. And if somebody comes forward with a 10 or 12 or 14 story or taller, I would hope that we would welcome that. And I just wonder if some of the language is a bit restrictive. And maybe if we can say these are our minimums, but we would love to see bold ideas for this space. So that was just some of my feedback when I read it.
That's good feedback, Mayor, and that's consistent with the intent of the proposal for sure, so we can be more clear about that. Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. And then we should reiterate how many parking spaces this will add, since that continues to be a question I know many of us get asked. So what is the projection? I see Mr. Naramore here. What are we hoping? Up to 200, but potentially a proposal could come back with more.
Right.
Okay, but that's about what we're hoping. Okay.
Mayor, but
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No.
But to your point, if that's our minimum, so if there were more density promoted either through office, commercial, or residential, that could increase the parking requirement for the developer, but we would still want to have the 200 spaces for the public.
Yeah, great, thanks. Commissioner?
Yeah, thank you. I'm obviously, I think this is accomplishes a number of goals, which is main floor retail, activation of street front and downtown. I mean, additional parking in a location where parking demand is high. I think there's just one thing missing from this RFP, and that to me is, in a city-owned facility or a city-developed facility, we continue to talk about the lack of public restroom facilities in our downtown core, and so the opportunity to include some sort of public restroom component as part of this project seems to be, if we're, I think retrofitting existing facilities is expensive, but if we're incorporating it into it on the front end, that's certainly something I think should be considered in a project of this nature.
It's great feedback.
Great.
Yeah. And I'm sure the DDA would be a partner in that.
We anticipate that the DDA will be a partner in this development,
Okay.
yeah.
But I don't think it's explicitly stated in the RFP, so I just wondered if that should be included in the language.
Which part?
The desire to have a
public
public
restroom.
restroom facility as part of a city-owned
So
parking
we
facility.
need to consider revising the scope to add that proposal.
Great. Well, I'll just end that. I'm glad to see this move forward. I know we were hoping years ago that this site would be developed, so it's nice that we're moving forward to get it back out there and hopefully get developed sometime soon.
Why don't we just go for the home run and add public art as part of it as well?
Oh, sure.
Hey, let's go. Let's put it
No
all
doubt.
in.
I believe that's how you can get a density bonus, Mark.
Yeah.
Commissioner Kelly, any final thoughts before I call the question?
Yeah, it's just good to see that we are getting a little bit more creative with the use of space, too. I know we had conversations before about how you couldn't convert parking lots to anything else, and we're seeing some solutions. We read about that in here, and on Michigan Street, even how they have worked to, with a ramp at the Midtown building that's mixed income, so that the ramp is on the side, so that they can eventually perhaps convert that to housing too. So it's just great to see that flexibility being built in at the outset.
Commissioner, or City Manager.
And I also want to add, in terms of at least the sample design, if it were built with retail with the parking on top and residential and commercial above that, particularly as areas begin being activated with live music in other areas, that lessens the disturbance between the ground floor retail and the residents that would live above it if it's built with parking in between versus underground. And we'll have a related conversation later with our noise ordinance.
Yeah, and that would be consistent with the South Arena development. You have commercial, then parking, and then the residential on top. So again, I think I'm hopeful that we hear from some creative developers that come forward with some exceptional ideas for that space. And so I'll call the question, and I'll just trust that the city manager will work with you to make some of the amendments based on the feedback here, and then move forward with getting the RFP out. Is that good? All right, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next is a resolution providing for the publication of and setting a public hearing to consider a proposed ordinance repealing and replacing Article 5 of Chapter 151 of Title 9 of the Code of the City of Grand Rapids entitled Noise Control to update and improve the city's noise control ordinance.
So moved.
Support.
Can I take the next one together with it? To set the fines?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. So I'll read the next one as well and have both of them up for consideration. Next one, which is a companion item, a resolution providing for the publication of and setting a public hearing to consider a proposed ordinance amending Section 9.857.151 of Chapter 170 of Title 9 of the Code of the City of Grand Rapids to add fines for violations of the city's noise control ordinance. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support.
All right.
Thank you, Mayor.
Hello, welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you. I'm Mike Hooker, Assistant City Attorney, and I'm here to brief you on our department's updates to the city's noise ordinance. These are proposed updates to both the noise ordinance, and as the mayor mentioned, we have a companion fines provision in Chapter 170. So our goals here to start with, our current noise ordinance, if my math is correct, is about 46 years old. And it's seen a few piecemeal updates here and there since then. What our department did is we launched an effort to update, condense, and clarify the language of the ordinance with a couple of major goals here to make it easier to both understand for citizens and for the city to enforce, and to make sure that it better conforms to developments in case law over those decades. To do this, we coordinated our efforts with our own enforcement division, along with community development, code compliance, design development, environmental services, planning, special events, and our police department. We also reviewed relevant case law, both local and federal, and we reviewed other noise ordinances from other municipalities, both within and outside of Michigan, to gauge best practices and other developments in other cities. So I'd like to just highlight some of the major changes that we've made and kind of explain why and how these provisions would work. We propose initially removing the specific decibel limits on motor vehicles, motorcycles, and motor equipment, along with boats and helicopters. These provisions are either unused by the city or in most part preempted by state or federal law. And those have been developments that have happened since the 70s when our ordinance was first enacted. But I would note, however, as to helicopters, that our zoning ordinance currently regulates the number of takeoffs and landings of helicopters, so that would remain in place. We propose replacing various prohibited sounds. Generally, our ordinance speaks about particular types of sounds right now. And what we propose doing is enacting a general noise disturbance provision, and we would define that in very legal terms, but that would be any sound which unreasonably disturbs a person of normal sensitivities or unreasonably interferes with the peaceful enjoyment of someone's premises because it can be heard either due to volume and intensity or distinctly and discreetly above ambient sound. And again, this sort of language, this reasonable person standard, geared to make it more objective and consistent with case law. We also propose that amplified sound on public property be prohibited if it exceeds conversational level from 100 feet away. And to reference the prior presentation, these distances would apply both vertically and horizontally to account for the vertical development we've seen in our city, especially recently. Some additional update highlights. We propose prohibiting radios, TVs, audio equipment, or amplifiers, or musical instruments which can be heard across the residential property line between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. And then we currently have a provision which speaks in terms of destroying the peace and tranquility of the neighborhood. And we amended that provision a few years ago to disturbs the peace and tranquility, but what we propose in this revision would be a residential disturbance, which is defined in the ordinance as frequent, repetitive, or continuous sound from a gathering which is audible 25 feet or more from the property line, and that would be between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. Similarly, we would also propose a provision which would apply to, quote, entertainment or business, entertainment or commercial business sound, and that would be, that would prohibit sound from entertainment or commercial businesses which is clearly audible 100 feet or more from the property line of an entertainment or commercial business, starting at 10 p.m. on weeknights and 1 a.m. on weekends, and that would go until 7 o'clock the next morning. Again, and these distance-based restrictions are meant to be both easily understood by citizens and those who they would apply to, and then also easily enforced. It's a very objective thing that doesn't require specialized equipment and calibration, all those sorts of things. And in addition to these prohibitions, we also propose enumerating 5 categories of exceptions to make it clear to citizens what is allowed. These sorts of things would be lawn and snow equipment, which I hear we might need this winter because if it's anything like last winter, and emergency vehicles and other sound which is accompanied by a permit. And the companion agenda item, the next agenda item, which addresses Chapter 170, what we've proposed is that all noise ordinance violations be decriminalized and be civil infractions as opposed to misdemeanors. And we've received support from our enforcement division on that. Currently, because we have not provided otherwise, by default, these offenses are misdemeanors. So we propose decriminalizing these offenses, making them civil infractions, with the only exception being that a repeat offense by the same person within 6 months could be prosecuted as a misdemeanor. And then the exception to that would be that our loud sound systems and vehicles provision, which is Section 970, those offenses would always be civil infractions. That would be outside of this repeat offenses within 6 months provision. And then in addition, we also, in addition to making the offenses civil infractions, we also propose codifying that warnings are always available, and including before a repeat offense would become a misdemeanor. The goal here is to encourage collaboration and education between enforcement and our citizens. And the only exception there would be the draft would limit warnings for prohibited entertainment and commercial sound to 1 warning every 6 months. The idea being that if you are operating on a continuous basis in the community, this is the sort of thing that you would know about. And in addition to these changes and these updates which we proposed, there are significant portions of the ordinance which we would propose leaving as is. Those would include the restrictions on construction activity, horns, truck idling, and muffler modifications. To reference back to one of the earlier slides, state and federal law largely regulates motor equipment when it's sold new. So that's not really a place for the city now, but what we propose is keeping the provision which prevents people from modifying equipment after the fact to make it louder. And I believe that's currently used in practice with the city. The zoning-based decibel limits, which are currently incorporated throughout Section 9.363, we propose just removing those and putting them in a new section, keeping those substantively the same. And then likewise, the technical updates, regulations, and noise variance sections, we also propose keeping those exactly the same as they are now. And then the regulation on sound systems in vehicles, which is Section 970,
which I referenced earlier. We propose keeping that substantively the same. The only change we would propose there would be moving the nighttime hours from 7 p.m. as currently to 10 p.m., which makes that provision consistent with our nighttime hours defined elsewhere in other provisions. And then also in that section, there is a fine range provided, but the commission separately has later provided for specific fines for sound systems in vehicles in Chapter 170, so we would just propose removing that fine range in this provision in deference to the later specific fines that are set elsewhere. So speaking of Chapter 170, the companion subsequent agenda item that we've prepared, this would update the nuisance section of Chapter 170 to set the civil fines for all noise ordinance violations. And the fines that we propose would be $100, $200, and $400 for first, second, and all subsequent offenses. These dollar amounts are consistent with the existing fines set in this provision, the existing sound systems and vehicles fines, and the other nuisance fines. And then likewise, we would propose setting the fines for prohibited commercial or entertainment sound at levels of 200, 400, and 800 respectively for first, second, and subsequent violations. We've worked through this project to align these updates with the city's goals of collaboration and equity, and as next steps, we would propose setting a public hearing on the proposed ordinance revisions for November 12, and then scheduling a vote for consideration on November 19. And if the commission is inclined to approve, we would be happy to coordinate on education and outreach in the city.
All right. Questions, commissioners? Okay. Seeing none, I'll call the question for setting the public hearing for both items. So this is for the repeal and replacement, and then also the fines. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. Thank you. All right, commissioners, it'll take us to our last item. And then I should remind you, we do have an executive session today right after this meeting, and we'll be meeting for executive session down in 601. And then we have legislative committee meeting at 12:30. And so this is our last action item is a resolution providing for the publication of and setting a date to consider a proposed ordinance repealing and replacing Chapter 153 of Title 9 of the Code of the City of Grand Rapids entitled Firearms. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Support.
All right, moved and supported. Ms. Riwa is here to tell us about this, and it looks like our city attorney will also help, and looks like the chief. This is a joint effort. This is a team effort.
I got that. No, please. Okay, good morning, City Commission, City Manager. We were here back on January 23rd and talked about replica guns. And since then, we've had multiple discussions about replica guns, pneumatic weapons, and imitation guns, and the impact that it's having on our community today. And we talked about our ordinance and the state of our ordinance today and how that needs to be updated to reflect the needs of the city today, or the needs of our community today. And so today what you're going to hear is you're going to hear from Chief Payne and members of the Grand Rapids Police Department on the complexity of trying to distinguish the difference between the pneumatic weapons, the imitation guns, and real guns. And then we're going to give you a current status update, give you what we're proposing as our changes to a new ordinance, and then next steps. Payne, back to you.
Mayor, Commissioner, City Manager, thank you for allowing me to speak today. If you guys want to bring it up, please. Thank you. You can set it down, just uncover it. Officers routinely are being called in the community by citizens to, yes. Sorry.
That's all right.
Little rehearsal.
We were wondering what was under that yellow.
But officers are routinely being called into the community by citizens with reports. Commissions, can you see it okay, or we can hold it up?
And,
Okay.
yeah.
By,
If you want to show the audience, you're welcome to pick it up and show
Okay.
folks.
Citizens who are reporting people with guns. Sometimes these are juveniles,
Careful with
sometimes
those.
they're adults. What you see before you is a collection of weapons that we have seized over the years. And some of them are real, some of them are fake. And officers are required to discern which are real, fake within a split second. I don't believe anyone could do it. In fact, yesterday I looked at the board and I really had to look at it. Today I spent 10 minutes studying it, so I do know. There are the three top weapons, if you guys can point to them, are replica, pneumatic or BB guns. As you see on the bottom, one of the long weapons are real, one of them are fake. So that's what we've encountered. There was a big gap in this, with the state ordinance or state laws a few years back that did not address this, and that's what this ordinance will hopefully address. In the last 3 years, we recovered 1,067 firearms. They were handguns, long guns. They were taken as evidence, safekeeping, or found property. We've also recovered 201 BB guns, pellet guns, and airsoft guns. So this is just an example of what we're seeing out there on the street, and there was a big hole in our ability to enforce and have contact with people who are carrying these type of weapons.
Thank you, Chief. So just as a reminder, in 2015, state law changed. And what that change meant was BB guns are now defined as pneumatic weapons and not firearms. The other thing that the law did is put a prohibition on youth in their use of BB guns, and that was repealed. And so the thing that affects us most is that what the state did is leave it up to local government to decide whether to regulate pneumatic guns, including possession of juveniles based on local needs. And so as you heard from the chief, from Chief Payne, the number of imitation and pneumatic guns taken into evidence has been numerous. The other thing is pneumatic guns look a lot alike real guns, so much that residents, I don't know why I'm tongue-tied here, forgive me, so much that residents have called 911 believing that they've seen real guns, causing the police to respond to what they think are real guns. And so when we take that into account, those two things into account, we would suggest that there's a need for our local government to regulate this area, to reflect our current needs within our city and for the best interests of our community. The current city firearm ordinance was written in 1967 with very few updates. There's nothing in it that regulates pneumatic guns, such as BB guns and paint guns and et cetera. There's nothing in that ordinance that regulates replica guns or imitation guns. So our goal is to modernize the ordinance to meet the community's current needs and enhance the importance of community safety. Update our ordinance in furtherance of the city attorney's commitment to review our city codes and to embrace the concept of police and community working together for a safer community. Changes in the new, what we're terming as weapons ordinance, changing it from firearms ordinance to weapons ordinance. It will update the definition of firearms. It'll regulate pneumatic guns. It'll regulate imitation firearms, and it'll regulate other projectile weapons. Kristen Rewa, who is our Public Safety Counsel, will share with you the specifics of those changes. Kristen.
So our current ordinance defines firearms as anything that expels a projectile, either by an explosive, even air, gas, anything like that, which would used to include everything from what you'd think of as a firearm to a BB gun to even bows and arrows. So what we would propose to do first is sort of fix the definitional problem to align what our definition of firearm is with state law, which is an explosive. So that we can also regulate pneumatic guns as defined by state law. So within the weapons ordinance, as indicated by city attorney, the proposed weapons ordinance would cover firearms, pneumatic guns, imitation firearms, and other projectile weapons. So when we talk about firearm regulation, it'll really end up being what already exists in the current ordinance. First of all, it would prohibit discharge of a firearm, something that propels by an explosive, anything within any discharge within the city. Currently, our current ordinance prohibits flourishing a firearm, which is synonymous with the word brandish, but this proposed ordinance would, instead of use the word flourish, use the word brandish, and then use the definition provided by state law, just so that's clear. And brandish means to point, wave about, or display in a threatening manner with intent to induce fear in another person. That way it would be clear for everybody. Otherwise, firearm regulation would functionally remain the same. When we talk about pneumatic guns, now remember, pneumatic guns are things that propel projectile through means of gas or some other thing like that. We're talking BB guns, we're talking airsoft guns, and paintball guns as well. The proposed ordinance would prohibit discharge of these items in a public place. It would prohibit youth under the age of 16 from possessing in a public place without adult supervision. It would regulate, so it wouldn't totally prohibit, but it would regulate discharge of these items on private property, and that's consistent with state law. We are required to maintain their reasonable and responsible use of these items on private property. And it would prohibit brandishing of a pneumatic gun in the city. Now, when we talk about imitation firearms, what we're talking about are those things that are regulated under federal law that are required to have distinctive markings on them so that people will be able to know that they are essentially a toy or not a real firearm. So we're talking about the requirement that these items have an orange tip or they have a distinctive marking like translucent casing, things like that. So what the ordinance would propose to do is that it would require that these devices have and comply with those federal regulations on having those markings. And as such, would prohibit the display, exposure, or brandish of any weapon or of any imitation firearm that does not have those markings. Also regulating the sale or possession or giving away of firearms that do not have those federally required markings. The ordinance would also prohibit altering an imitation firearm to look more like a real firearm, basically removing those orange tips, or possessing an imitation firearm with knowledge that those federally required items have been removed. And I just want to take a step back too. As we developed this ordinance, we did a review across the state and the nation of what the weapons ordinances are in Michigan, and in particular with imitation firearms across the nation. So imitation firearms and having some local pull through of what the federal regulations require, we have seen in other cities like New York City, Boston, in particular Columbus, Ohio, which has the most recent imitation firearm regulations, and we kind of use that as a model. We also looked at Cleveland, Ohio. They also have an imitation or facsimile regulation as well, and theirs actually goes a little farther than ours does. But so there are other cities, particularly in other states, that have these. And with all of these provisions within our code, we also look to state law. I was unable to locate anything specifically in the state of Michigan about imitation firearms, but in terms of regulating BB guns and our provisions on firearms, there is some consistency throughout. There are other state municipalities within our state that do have regulations on BB guns and such. So finally, On accountability, there are some accountability measures within the ordinance as well. First of all, it is a requirement of parental control over a youth's possession or use of firearms, essentially a parental responsibility. Requiring those property owners that do decide to allow or use pneumatic guns, bows, crossbows, other projectiles on their private property to take reasonable steps to prevent irresponsible use and having those projectiles go outside the bounds of their property. Consistent with state law, provide a mechanism for disposal of weapons that are used in violation of the ordinance. And then finally, consistent with our current firearms ordinance, all violations of this ordinance would be a misdemeanor. Part of going forward, and I think Anita will speak a little more about the timeline, but if and when adopted, part of our discussions internally with staff, and this is across many departments, is to develop an education campaign so citizens know that we are looking at this, formally now introduced, hopefully, and then moving forward with, if passed and in the manner passed, that there is an education campaign for citizens, for youth, so that they understand what the new law is and what is and is not required of them. And so we're working with, it would be Office of Communications, legal, police. Recently we're bringing in our community's children and also the Office of Oversight and Public Accountability to sort of collaborate all together to get the message out through our social media, through traditional media outlets, through PSAs. So we are sort of in development on a concerted effort to get the information out from an educational perspective so that people know beforehand to hopefully prevent the 911 calls and things like that. So as a wrap up.
Thank you. And the education piece is very important to us, and so we're going to put a lot of time and energy in that to make sure that the community does know about the changes and understands them. And so, and another thing that wasn't mentioned is that we've added to our website a section to put on their new ordinances and to be able to try to educate people on what changes are being made in regards to new ordinances. That brings us to a close, and so we have an opportunity to take steps to improve public safety and assist our community policing efforts by updating the current firearms ordinance by regulating pneumatic guns and imitation guns as allowed by law. So our hope is that today is the introduction, and our hope is to come back on November 12th, so that, and ask for adoption. Correct? Right? And then I'd just like to thank Chief Payne and the dedicated members of the police department for assisting us in this. And Kristen, certainly thank you for all of your hard work. And questions? Go ahead.
And I want to thank the legal department. We saw the void that was created with the change in state law. We are responding to these calls. They're generated by citizens. As you can see here, this wasn't brought out to frighten anyone, but this is the reality of what we're seeing out on the streets and what we're dealing with, which is why we support this ordinance. I just want to point out, though, adopting ordinance, and what this is about is safety of the community and being responsive to the citizens of the city of Grand Rapids. We've also, part of trying to have a safer community, we're looking at, and we were able to hire 2 people to become victim advocates, or one internally, one externally for the police department, where we're sending them out on we will be sending them out on violent crimes. That was a budgeted position, but we recognized that was too big for, to have the internal component, and that's officer wellness. So we sought and we received a grant that was approved. But we're looking at a number of things. We're looking at the gun shops, securing weapons, talking to our city legislative liaison to see if that can be something that Lansing looks at. So we're looking across the board to have a safer community, and this ordinance would be one part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I know we've talked about this for quite some time, so it's nice to see it come forward. I have some questions, but I'll turn to my colleagues first. Commissioner Jones, did I see you have your hand up?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much to the Law Department, the Chief, the officers on this morning for providing a very thorough overview of the ordinance. Got a couple of questions regarding implementation and education and outreach. It was mentioned that the goal or the hope would be to have this brought back before us on November 12th for adoption. When would it then go into effect? Would it go into effect then on November 12th?
That's a good question.
No, typically it's 30 days after adoption, but we've had conversation and we've not had conversation. The effective date being January 1st of 2020.
Okay, January 1st. Okay, very good.
It has to be with an amendment. So, City Attorney, in follow-up then, will that provide time to do a comprehensive education campaign
That was,
before it goes into effect on January 1?
We believe so.
Yeah. That would, and thank you for that, Mayor. That's a good lead-in. I will tell you that my biggest concern about all of this, first of all, it is the safety and the well-being of officers in terms of having to discern what is real and what is not. And there's also a very deep concern for the public, parents in particular, to fully understand all of this. And so I am I would advocate for us being very thoughtful and very discerning about when that effective date would take place, because I know that we can't guarantee that every citizen be properly informed. But when I consider the potential effects of being caught with one of these items, I see here according to the language, that penalty is up to $500 or imprisonment for up to 90 days or both. Again, as a misdemeanor. But also the impact for parents, and the parents fully understanding what the expectations are of them, because I may not have bought BB guns for my kids, but some parents do, and so I'm not faulting parents for that. However, this is where I would lean heavily on individuals like Mr. Hicks, who's in the audience from MLive, and his colleagues from television media to help us in this effort, whether it's a full slate of PSAs with Chief Payne involved, other officers, others just really advocating for people understanding what this means. I will tell you again, my biggest concern is just being able to translate this to the community to help them fully understand what's at play here. And so I understand the need to move rapidly to get it up for adoption, but I just want to make sure that in terms of its effective date, again, I beg the question, is January 1st, is that enough time to properly educate, to get the word out, to make sure that people fully understand what's at play here?
So, Commissioner, we understand the importance of our community being educated far and wide, and so we're committed to that. And what we can do is give updates along the way as far as where we are with our educational rollout. We don't have to wait right up until we're here for adoption or our expiration date, but we've started working on it immediately, and we'll continue to do that aggressively, and perhaps I think it would help to give you updates so that you can see how we're progressing, and that might help.
Great. Thanks, Commissioner Lanier, and then Commissioner Kelly, and then Moody.
Thank you all for the presentation and the display of the examples of what you're referring to. I just want to make sure, I need to slow down just a little bit for me to make sure I'm understanding what's before us. So I have a few questions, so bear with me, please. The first one is regarding the adoption date, and if we could talk a little bit about why not do a public hearing prior to adoption. That could be its own form of education, because perhaps the public could share thoughts, concerns, or preferences during that public hearing that could inform how the public could be educated later. And I think if, based on the previous presentation, there could be a hearing on the 12th and then adoption on the 19th, so it really wouldn't slow down, I don't think, the timeline that you have. So we don't buy guns in our home, so forgive me for not fully understanding this, but there are guns that look like other guns, like there are fake guns that look like real guns, right? And if they're a fake gun that has an orange tip or some other identifier that indicates that they're fake, they're okay, even if they look like a real gun. If there was a gun that looks like one of those guns, but it had an orange tip or, was orange, they don't qualify for this. Am I understanding that right?
If it's a pneumatic, this gets a little complicated.
Sure, right.
BB guns are not required to have an orange tip. So they can look just as real as a real gun, but be a BB gun.
And they're prohibited.
They are treated like pneumatic guns. So state law allows us to prohibit discharge and to regulate use on private property and to regulate some youth possession with adult oversight.
Okay.
When we are talking about airsoft guns, those are required by federal law to have the orange tip, but because state law calls them pneumatic guns, we have to regulate them like pneumatic guns. So airsoft, BB guns, paintball guns, those are pneumatic guns.
Mm-hmm. They can or cannot look like this.
Correct, they can,
So,
yeah.
I mean, when I've gone paintballing at some place, they don't look like that.
Yeah, and some of them can have those, futuristic looks, so they don't look like current
Sure.
real guns, but that's not necessarily the requirement. And in part, in doing this, we have to treat those like pneumatic guns.
So whether they look like a real gun or not, because it's a paintball gun, it falls under this regulation.
Under the pneumatic gun regulations
Okay.
in there.
Got it. Okay.
So the imitation guns, those are not pneumatic guns, but those are toys, essentially, or devices that look like guns that are required by federal law to have markings. And so a lot of them are toys. Like you can have a cap gun and it'll have the orange tip. Another example is with our officer recruits, we don't give them firearms right away. They have these little blue dummy guns. They're blue because of federal regulation, because they look like a gun. They have to have that distinctive marking.
I
So that would
see.
be another example.
Okay.
So yes.
Okay. I think you've helped
Okay.
with that. Thank you.
Which is why we need education.
Yeah,
Because it's
absolutely.
confusing.
Right. Exactly,
It's
it
very
is.
confusing.
And then, so that actually answers probably 3 questions. So my last question is, are these guns that we are going to prohibit, are people able to sell these in the city of Grand Rapids? And if they're able to sell them in the city of Grand Rapids, then what's our next move about having something sold in the city that we prohibit people from being able to use without receiving a misdemeanor behind it?
So the provision about sale applies only to the imitation firearms. We cannot regulate sale of real firearms or pneumatic guns under state law. So the sale provision applies only to the toys. And the prohibition on sale is only if they fail to comply with federal law. So if they're selling a cap gun and they remove all of the orange markings, that's what's illegal. But if they're complying with those requirements under federal law, they would lawfully be able to sell, possess those things like that. If you're a movie, there are some exceptions under federal law, for example, for movies. If you got a waiver to use a real-looking firearm for a movie, you're okay, as long as you're using it consistent with that federal law requirement.
So we're preempted.
So the so someone can go and buy the gun that they can't use in the city of Grand Rapids, in the city.
We can't regulate.
This is more of a yes or no, so I can make sure I'm getting it. Because I
Well-
think that's what I'm hearing. I just want to know if that's yes or no.
Well, they shouldn't be able to buy a gun that's required to have markings and the markings aren't on them.
But can they buy one of the replica guns? Which do not have markings?
I think
So that's what I'm getting at, so it's yes.
I think there's an important distinction where we're failing. So if it does not produce a projectile, it has to have an orange tip. If it can produce a projectile, regardless of the mechanism in which it utilizes to produce a projectile, then it becomes regulated like a firearm in whatever capacity, and you cannot legally discharge that unless it meets one of the standards which we have established.
But you can purchase it.
Yes.
But we're not allowed to regulate that purchase.
Right, no, I didn't ask that question.
Right.
My question was simply, can they buy it?
Yes.
And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
And if we can't regulate the purchase, then who can?
Feds.
Right.
Feds
So-
and state.
So then that's a legislative conversation then. That's all, I'm just trying to get to where change can happen if it isn't here, just fully understanding it, because to me, it just doesn't make simple sense to be able to purchase something that you really can't use. But.
Can
Agreed.
I just want to offer clarity. We want to talk about using it appropriately. So if you had a BB gun and you're just doing target practice, and it's or a pneumatic gun and you're doing target practice in your own property, you can use it. You can use it for improved marksmanship or whatever the other reasons you would have to do that. So it's not like.
It's the replica more specifically that I'm referring to that aren't necessarily BBs. Yeah.
But it's against federal law to sell a replica, a gun that does not produce a projectile. It's illegal to produce that at the federal level unless it has a identifier being an orange tip.
Right.
And then who's monitoring sites that sell them to make sure that they're in compliance with the federal law? Is that a city thing? That thing?
My observation is that most often it's not the store that's selling them that removes the orange tip. It's often the folks who buy them, they'll either take a black marker and color it in, or they'll remove it altogether. So it's very likely that there, and maybe the chief can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding.
That's what we see.
Yeah, so currently it's federal law that would monitor that. If passed, the prohibition on sale or possession of something that should have a yellow tip or an orange tip on an imitation firearm was removed, would be something that we could take enforcement action if the sale happened in the city.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, I'll go to Commissioner Kelly and then Commissioner Moody.
Well, first, I want to thank you for your work on this, City Attorney and Attorney Riwa and Chief Payne and the Police Department, because we certainly want our community and our police officers to be safe, and we know that this is a real problem. It's beyond me why the state would have changed their laws around this, but I think we know that there's probably similarity in who's manufacturing these toy guns and those real guns. At any rate, I'm concerned, having again taught in public schools, that we do get the word out, and hoping that we will be working with not only Grand Rapids Public but the private and parochial schools in the city, and wondering if we might engage young people in doing a video. There's nothing about, I think there's a lot of respect for the men in uniform, men and women in uniform, but also the young people, to get the word out to their peers about this, because it certainly puts them at risk. It puts their families at risk. It's sometimes hard to control a teenager, as we all know, to keep them from putting themselves, a family, in a position of having a $500 misdemeanor or imprisonment. So anything we can do to engage our schools and our young people, even if maybe we produce the video and then hand it off to them, would be great. I even thought about the Mayor's Youth Council as being involved in something like this to help get the word out.
Yeah, we have been discussing those things exactly. Yes, that's what we're looking at doing. Hopefully it all coalesces, but we're doing an initial sort of information, quick information availability, like starting today with an info sheet on what the proposed ordinance is, but then going forward, utilizing all of our contacts to develop the message, get the message out in the way that's most effective for the people that most need to hear it.
Excellent, thank you, and include us, because we can push it out to our Facebook people and so on. And thank you to Chief Payne, I know you attended one of the Safe Places meeting, and we talked about the gun shops, and so thank you, City Attorney, for looking into that. We talked about that as well, because we know that some of the break-ins have resulted in guns being on the streets of Grand Rapids, so thank you so much.
Commissioner Moody?
I think everybody has somewhat asked the same question that I was going to ask, but I do have a concern, and that is that looking at the display there, I don't see any orange tips. And also those manufacturers that will sell guns with the orange tips on it, I still have a concern that, because Chief, you said within a matter of seconds you have to determine if that's a real gun or not. In some cases, I think some officers aren't going to be thinking about that. They're going to be thinking about gun, period. I would like to truly hold the manufacturers accountable. I would like to hold gun stores accountable, more so than we're putting penalties on the consumers in the community. I think we do them an injustice sometimes when the manufacturer is making tons of money off of the sale of toy guns, and lives can be lost off of that as well. So somewhere along the line, I hope we get to a point where we can hold our local stores responsible as well too. I think they owe us an explanation for their stores being broken into, because it's, to some degree they're not protecting the guns and allowing the guns to get out on the street, whether they're real or whether they are false. And I'm saying it because of the mere fact of the matter is that from an African American's perspective, we've lost a lot of young men through this country who may have carried toy guns but were not identified as toy guns. And I think that's important for me. So that's where I'm at. I thank you for what you guys are doing. I'd really like to get a closer look at that display, if possible. I can't tell the difference other than going on the internet and seeing the orange tips on the guns. I can't tell the difference for what is real. You guys have the experience to do that. But I know that in today's market, when I was growing up, the toy guns were green. Now they look just like the guns you guys carry.
I think that's the challenge and why it's so dangerous. Commissioner?
Got one more thing. Again, as I looked through this a couple times leading up until today, but also I failed to mention or ask the question, if I read the language correctly for the ordinance, toy guns essentially could be a civil infraction.
They could be if you wanted that change, yeah.
So a toy could essentially be a misdemeanor.
As written right now, yes, it could be a misdemeanor. If you choose to, if that's something you want to make an amendment to, that's certainly something that is in your prerogative to do. Just let us know and we can build those amendments in.
Yeah.
Commissioner, the reason we said misdemeanor is the serious nature of this. If you look at that, you can't tell the difference between a real firearm and an imitation firearm. And so we want to send a clear message of the importance of people being responsible in this area. So you have to also add in, what are they doing with the toy gun, right? So keep in mind, it's a city attorney's office who authorizes charges. So the police makes contact, and then they decide that perhaps the person broke the law in this certain way. Then that report is going to come to the city attorney's office for a warrant, and then we'll review that warrant based on the police report. And if you we're not trying to get innocent kids in trouble. What we're trying to do is deter people that are using those imitation guns, actually brandishing them, and putting themselves in jeopardy and others. So we're not just going to go and write a bunch of charges against kids who are being kids and playing with these guns, but we want to look at people that are actually putting themselves at risk as well as putting others at risk. And so we felt like the consequences needed to be at that level to try to deter that.
You know, I'm in favor of the ordinance, but what my concern is that we're not holding the manufacturers accountable and the legislator accountable for what we are doing. There's a bigger responsibility here, and I think it's important, if we're going to protect our officers in the community, we need to put some legislation in place on a higher level, because I am thoroughly afraid that I got a copy of this on my internet, and I can't tell the difference between the real guns and the toy guns, even with the toy guns having the tips on them. And if you got guns that are being taken out of stores, it's easy to take those tips off those guns. And that's what I'm afraid of. I mean, there has to be some accountability on a higher level, instead of the public being punished all the time because of some, I don't want to say this. Say it again.
Profit makers.
Thank you, Commissioner. Profit makers is the right word. Commissioner Kelly agrees with me on that, by the way.
Well, and Commissioner, I assure you that many of us around this table and the commission and even my predecessor, we've been very vocal about our disagreement with a number of state laws. And many of us have been very active and vocal in supporting common sense gun control and other legislation at the state and the federal level, unfortunately to little to no avail. And so I'm hopeful that we will be more successful in the coming years. But unfortunately, at the local level, currently, our options are very limited because of preemption laws that have been passed at the state of Michigan over the last decade. So, and I know Commissioner Kelly has been working on gun violence and a part of the task force for a number of years.
Right. So, thank you, Mayor. And to underscore what Commissioner Moody said about responsibility on the part of the manufacturers, the state is also obviously responsible because they changed the law. And I would like to encourage us, in the interest of transparency, when we do put together a video, to include that the state law changed in whatever the date was to allow and explain it. Because we fortunately can do something about it, but I think that the public needs to know that it was the state that changed this law to make this kind of toy available and put our officers at risk, put our citizens there at risk.
Chief, you had something?
I guess I might add, and to your point, there will be internal education of officers too. It's not the intent of this ordinance or my intent to criminalize some kid playing with a BB gun. And Ms. Hitchcock, she points out there's going to be reviews of these matters by her office. We're going to respond to these calls regardless of whether we have this ordinance or not. Whatever the penalty is, that will be determined by you. But the other thing I'll point out, I believe in this conversation other chiefs have had around the state and their concern with this same matter, I believe we'll be one of the first to adopt this in the state of Michigan.
For imitation.
For imitation. And I suspect they're going to be calling us if this is carried, wanting to imitate this ordinance, because it is a huge hole, and it really goes to the safety of the communities out there.
I couldn't agree more, and I just, again, I'll reiterate that one of my greatest concerns is, especially as it pertains to the toy gun provision, the racial and socioeconomic impact it could have in our city, if there's the potential of children who are being charged with a civil infraction and a misdemeanor. I think that we ought to be very thoughtful about that, and I'm not questioning the vetting or the investigation that both the law department and the police department will do for a circumstance where this might occur. I just want us to be very proactive and not in advance potentially criminalizing children. And that's what I think this could do, that particular part of the ordinance. And so I think it really reiterates the importance of education and outreach to community. And I'm just, again, this is not something I want to rush through, and I understand that we need to operate with a sense of urgency, but I want to make sure that we are doing our due diligence, even if it takes a little bit more time, to educate the community about this and about the potential price that they have to pay if they are, again, if their children are in possession of one of these, so.
Okay, I have Commissioner Lanier and then our city manager.
Commissioner Jones, to your point, perhaps you may want to request data on, historic data on who has been in possession of those weapons in order to determine, the age of those who are participating, in order to know if almost immediately you may have young children tied into this process. But I do want to go back to the, which could then, maybe change your position on whether you would want to amend from misdemeanor to civic infraction. Because I, to your point, Madam City Attorney, I do agree that you want to send a strong message to those who may be using them in a way that they're trying to scare people. And they're not children, or robbing people and things of that nature. So you don't necessarily want to have a civic infraction for it, but there may be a way to do a combination of this so that maybe first offense is this civil infraction, but still keeping the fines at the levels that you currently have in here, which, they're not small. So hopefully that too will be an opportunity for those who are participating to be educated. But I do want to go back to the public hearing, and as I was asking multiple questions, I didn't hear a response about that, and just wanted to know if there was interest for this body or for you all to have a public hearing so that we can engage the community on the front end as we're, before this becomes a law, and then we hear what people are thinking afterwards.
City Attorney?
So we'd like to hear from you all on what you're thinking as far as a public hearing. We're very open to that.
All right, so why don't I turn to the city manager, and then if someone wants to propose amending this to add a public hearing, we can take that up as an amendment. City manager, I know you wanted to add something, so I'll go to you.
Well, I've been listening very deliberately to your discussions, and much of what we've been discussing on the dais, those conversations did happen among staff. We knew that this was changed, but I just want to take you back to at least my orientation to the issue was shortly after I arrived. We had an officer-involved shooting with a youth that had a replica weapon, and fortunately, it was a miss. But we could have been talking about injury or fatality of a youth. And that was around the same time we were dealing with the youth interaction policy. So I think the origin of it was, it began around how do we encourage more responsible consumerism, particularly among the youth in our community around replica weapons to avoid those type of incidents. So I want to be very clear that was the inception. Now we know that the impact is much greater than youth. Regarding the concerns, what we've been trying to focus on in our policy is what's under local control. And that's why we've been focusing on individual consumer behavior. We've talked about things that are at the retail or manufacturer level, but to the recognition, I'm not sure we have much provision to regulate that. We can find out. Commissioner Leonard asked what is happening right now and who's regulating those retailers, and I don't know if it's ATF or some other state agency and how they go about doing that. We can get that information. Regarding the timing, I think anytime we're talking about trying to effectively engage and do policing with community, that was the recommendation from 21st Century, that we want to make sure the proper education's occurred. We can be more deliberate. I think the January 1 date is around the break in the holidays. Kids are still out for school. We could possibly look at making sure we coordinate with the school district and see and come back with a recommendation right around the public hearing as to what is the best implementation date that allows us to communicate with the school. I'm regarding community input around this. We have been working on this internally. I think we've talked about it at several community meetings, but we've not had a formal way to have it. It can happen here, or it can happen at Public Safety Committee meeting as well. That could be another venue for input.
Thanks. Well, I'm open to having a public hearing. I know we, in November, have back-to-back meetings because of the holiday, so potentially we could do a public hearing on the 12th and then bring this back before us on the 19th. I am concerned about our ability to have a really robust public awareness campaign in, 30 to 40 days. So I do think we may want to think about that. And, I'm not a communications expert, but I would think that we would want at least 60 days. And so maybe we can look at an effective date for 60 days after we adopt the ordinance. And then I think it would be helpful for this body to stay informed about the awareness campaign. In fact, that made me think about a couple years ago, we had supported some funding for a Know Your Rights campaign. I would love an update on that. I haven't heard about that in quite some time. But I know we expended some funds on that, so it'd be nice to get an update on where that is as well. I think that education is just as important, and it could be even aligned with this. So, commissioners, thoughts on a public hearing? Does anyone want to make a proposed amendment to include a public hearing and adjust the dates?
Well, I kind of wanted to, I'm willing to do it, but I'm just curious to hear
Yeah, I'm in support.
what people are thinking.
Sounds like Commissioner Kelly's supportive.
I mean, I guess I'm supportive of the ordinance. I don't need a public hearing to know that, I'm there. Let's just get it on the books and get it going. I don't think this is a controversial issue in the sense that I think we all understand the danger that's presented itself here. And I'm imagining that, a majority of people that in our community would support us making this transition. So it's like to the point that we want to get it on the books and get some education around it. I just want to get it going and get it done and take the action. And I think to the point about the education is, I guess I was raised in a household where firearms were around, but we always knew. And I had lots of toy guns as a child, but I knew that you treat them like a real gun and you don't point them at people. And so to the idea that that should just be known that if you're gonna give your child a toy gun or an airsoft gun or a real gun, that they need to treat it respectfully. And the idea that we need to educate people not to point guns at people is kind of seems a little bit counterintuitive to me. That we should, if you have a gun, whether it shoots a BB or a airsoft pellet or a paintball or a bullet or doesn't shoot anything at all, you don't point that at someone.
Others, other thoughts on timeline? Commissioner Kelly and then Moody?
I think that the point of having a public hearing isn't because parents aren't telling the same thing to their kids that your parents did. I think it's more just, again, one more piece to raise the awareness. Hopefully, Justin will report on that and we'll get the word out. It's just another way to do that public education. I want to get this done too. I'm supportive of it, but I think that anything we can do to raise awareness, any avenue, makes sense.
All right. Other thoughts? Commissioner Moody, did you have your hand up?
Well, I want to go back to what Commissioner Jones said earlier, and that is using every possible way to have media get the message out. And it doesn't matter if we do it today or tomorrow, but I think the message needs to get out every possible way, in any way possible. Newspaper, television, Facebook, or whatever. I think that's important for us.
Yeah, thanks.
I'll move to amend that we include a public hearing for November 12th.
Support.
Okay, so it's moved and supported. So the amendment before us is to adjust the dates, have a public hearing on November 12th, have it come back before us the following week on November 19th for adoption. Any additional thoughts on that? All right, I'll say I'm supportive. It's a difference of a week, and I agree. It gives us additional time to work on the education component of it. So related to the amended timeline, adding a public hearing, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, so we'll move forward with publication today, public hearing on the 12th, back before us on the 19th. If in the meantime, between now and our next meeting on the 12th, if a plan for the education and awareness that captures some of the feedback around this table, making sure it gets out to all different types of media outlets, including social media, if that plan can get fleshed out a little bit with a timeline, and then also how it will be done in partnership with maybe the school system and others who are working with youth, that would be great. And if that can be shared, I think by the 12th, that would be appreciated.
Okay. Absolutely.
Okay. Any other thoughts? All right, commissioners, with that, we are done with our agenda. And next, I'm going to call the question to go into executive session. This executive session is for pending litigation, an update on that, and it will be in room 601. So can I get a motion to immediately go into executive session?
So moved.
Support?
All right, and that's a roll call. Commissioner Jones?
Yes.
Commissioner O'Connor?
Yes.
Commissioner Lanier?
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly?
Yes.
Commissioner Moody?
Yes.
Commissioner Park? All right, and I'm a yes, so please go down to room 601